The mistress poisoned the pregnant wife's tea. The millionaire's reaction in court shocked everyone. Hi, my very beautiful, precious, and loyal family. How are you today? I love you from the deepest part of my heart. You are not just viewers, you are my real family. My beautiful sisters and brothers, my precious daughters and sons, you are my joy, my reason to smile through pain, my strength on the hardest days. Every single one of you is a light in my life, and I thank God for you every day. A deep and loving prayer for my beautiful family. May your hearts be covered in peace, your days filled with light, and your nights wrapped in comfort. I pray that love finds you wherever you are, that hope never leaves your side, and that every silent tear becomes a blessing in disguise. May strength rise in you when you're tired, and may your life overflow with grace, joy, and deep, unshakable love. You are so loved more than you'll ever know, but today my heart feels heavy. YouTube has again reduced our reach. After all the love, effort, and sleepless nights, it feels like they keep silencing our voice. I won't lie to you. I'm sad, deeply sad. I feel like giving up, like all our hard work is being pushed aside, and it hurts more than I can say, but then I think of you, my loyal family, the love in your words, the strength in your support. You remind me why I keep going. You are my reason to rise, even on the days I feel like falling. So please stay with me. Like the videos, comment with your beautiful hearts. Share them. Help me keep this love alive. Let's show the world that real love can never be buried. Let's start again with love. I need you now more than ever. I love you so, so much. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Dominic Higgins' mansion, casting golden beams across the antique furniture of his private study. Elizabeth Lyle adjusted her easel, her slender fingers working with practiced precision. At 28, she had established herself as one of the most sought-after portrait artists in the city, her work hanging in galleries and private collections. Yet this commission, painting the reclusive real estate magnate Dominic Higgins, promised to be her most lucrative yet. She took a steadying breath, trying to calm the inexplicable flutter in her stomach. This was merely another wealthy client. She reminded herself, nothing more. The heavy oak door swung open, and Elizabeth's breath caught in her throat. Dominic Higgins commanded attention without effort. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that had just the right amount of silver at the temples. His custom suit accentuated his athletic build, and his penetrating grey eyes assessed her with an intensity that sent heat coursing through her veins. "Miss Lyle," he said, his voice deep and resonant, "I apologize for keeping you waiting." Elizabeth extended her hand, summoning her professional demeanor. "Mr. Higgins, it's a pleasure to meet you." When their fingers touched, an electric current seemed to pass between them. His hand was warm, strong, enveloping hers completely. Their eyes locked, and for a moment, the room, the mansion, the world outside ceased to exist. "Please," he said, holding her gaze a beat longer than necessary, "call me Dominic." "Only if you call me Elizabeth," she replied, surprised by the husky quality of her own voice. As she directed him to the chair positioned near the window, Elizabeth's artistic eye appreciated the perfect angles of his jawline, the subtle hollows beneath his cheekbones. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, controlled power in every step. "How would you like me?" Dominic asked, the question hanging in the air between them with unintended implications. Elizabeth swallowed, her mouth suddenly dry. "Just sit naturally. Let your body find its most comfortable position." She approached him, her heart racing. Traitorously as she adjusted his posture, tilting his chin slightly, turning his shoulders to catch the light. Each touch was professional, necessary, yet electric. His skin was warm beneath her fingertips, and she felt his breath quicken at her proximity. "Your eyes," she murmured, almost to herself, "they're remarkable. So many colors in this light." Dominic's gaze held hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. "And yours are like whiskey in sunlight." The compliment, delivered in that velvet baritone, sent warmth pooling low in her abdomen. Elizabeth retreated to her easel, needing distance from the magnetic pull she felt toward him. As she began sketching preliminary lines, Elizabeth stole glances at her subject, capturing the essence of the man before her. Not just his physical and presence, imposing as it was, but something deeper, a loneliness that lingered around his eyes, a tension in the set of his shoulders. "Have you been married long?" she asked, nodding toward the platinum band on his left hand. A shadow crossed his features. 5 years. And is Mrs. Higgins looking forward to seeing your portrait?" His laugh held no humor. "Cassandra has little interest in art, or in me for that matter, unless it concerns social standing or family connections." Elizabeth recognized the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't pry." "Don't apologize," Dominic said softly. "It's refreshing to speak honestly with someone." Their conversation flowed easily as the afternoon progressed, discovering shared interests in classical literature and obscure jazz musicians. Elizabeth found herself revealing more about her childhood in foster care than she had told anyone. In years, while Dominic spoke of the emptiness of his success, the hollowness of his marriage of convenience. As the light began to fade, Elizabeth set down her charcoal. "We should stop for today, the light is changing." Dominic rose, rolling his shoulders to release the tension of sitting still. "May I see?" She hesitated. She rarely showed her preliminary sketches, but nodded. He moved behind her, his presence enveloping her as he looked over her shoulder. His scent, sandalwood, leather, and something uniquely male, filled her senses. He was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, his breath stirring the loose tendrils of hair at her neck. "You see more than most," he murmured, his voice low near her ear. Elizabeth turned her head slightly, finding his face inches from hers. "It's my job to see." "And what do you see, Elizabeth?" The way he said her name was like a caress. "I see." She began, but the words died on her lips as his gaze dropped to her mouth. The tension between them pulled taut, ready to snap. His hand moved to her waist, tentative yet possessive. Elizabeth knew she should step away, maintain professional boundaries, but her body betrayed her, leaning imperceptibly closer. The study door swung open without warning. "Dominic, darling, I thought we had—" Elizabeth stepped back hastily as a woman entered, tall, immaculately dressed, with cold beauty and calculating eyes. Cassandra Higgins surveyed the scene with a predatory gaze, quickly assessing the charged atmosphere. "You must be the artist," she said, her cultured voice dripping, with barely concealed disdain. Her eyes raked over Elizabeth's simple dress and paint-stained fingers. "Elizabeth Lyle," she offered, extending her hand. Cassandra ignored it. How quaint. Dominic mentioned he'd commissioned a portrait, though I can't imagine why. These digital, a photograph would suffice. "Some things cannot be captured by a camera," Dominic said, his voice hardening as he moved to stand between the women. "Indeed," Cassandra replied, her smile never reaching her eyes. "Well, don't let me interrupt your artistic process. I merely wanted to remind you of dinner with the Vandermeers tonight. 8 o'clock. She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Miss Lyle, do be careful with the furnishings. Some items in this room are worth more than most people earn in a lifetime." After Cassandra's departure, a heavy silence descended. Elizabeth busied herself packing her supplies, her hands trembling slightly. "I should apologize for my wife," Dominic said finally. "There's no need." Elizabeth kept her eyes on her task. He crossed the room in 3 strides, gently taking the brushes from her hands. "Look at me, Elizabeth. She raised her eyes to his, finding them dark with conflict and desire. "I should end these sessions now," he said, his voice rough. "Send you away with full payment and find another artist." "Is that what you want?" she whispered. "What I want?" His hand rose to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing her lower lip. "What I want hasn't mattered for a very long time." The last threads of her resistance snapped. Elizabeth leaned forward, pressing her lips to his. For one heart-stopping moment, he remained still, and she feared she had misread everything. Then, with a groan that seemed torn from his soul, Dominic pulled her against him, deepening the kiss with hungry desperation. His mouth claimed hers with barely restrained passion, his tongue seeking entrance. Elizabeth yielded willingly, her body melting into his hands tangled in her hair, angling her head to deepen their connection, while hers gripped his shoulders, feeling the solid strength beneath fine fabric. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Dominic rested his forehead against hers. "This cannot happen," he whispered, even as his hands contradicted his words, caressing her back, her waist, the curve of her hip. "I know," Elizabeth agreed, even as she pressed herself closer, feeling the undeniable evidence of his desire. And yet, his lips found the sensitive spot below her ear, trailing fire down her neck. "And yet," she echoed, tilting her head to give him better access, her body thrumming with want. A distant door closing somewhere in the mansion broke the spell. They separated reluctantly, reality intruding on their moment of madness. "Tomorrow," Dominic said, his voice husky with promise and regret. "Same time." Elizabeth nodded, gathering her remaining composure along with her supplies. As she left the mansion, the weight of his gaze followed her, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was walking into dangerous territory, a path that could lead to ecstasy or ruin. That night, alone in her modest apartment, Elizabeth dreamed of Grey, eyes and forbidden touches, her body aching for completion only he could provide. In the darkness, she whispered his name like a prayer and a curse, knowing that tomorrow would bring them one step closer to an inevitable surrender that could destroy them both. Chapter 2. Surrender to Temptation. 3 days had passed since the forbidden kiss in Dominic's study. 3 days of Elizabeth's hands trembling as she mixed paints, her mind replaying the pressure of his lips against hers, the heat of his body pressed to her own. 3 nights of restless sleep, her dreams filled with scenarios that left her waking breathless and aching. She arrived at the mansion precisely at 2 o'clock, just as storm clouds gathered on the horizon. The elderly butler who opened the door regarded her with knowing eyes that made Elizabeth's cheeks burn. "Mr. Higgins awaits you in the study, Miss Lale," he said, his voice betraying nothing. "Mrs. Higgins has departed for her sister's estate in Connecticut. She will be absent for several days." The implication hung in the air between them. They were alone in the house, save for the staff. Elizabeth nodded, clutching her art supplies tighter as she made her way down the familiar corridor. Dominic stood by the window, watching the darkening sky. He turned as she entered, his expression unreadable. "I wasn't certain you would return," he said quietly. Elizabeth set down her easel with deliberate care. "I considered not coming." "Why? Did you?" His question hung in the air, charged with possibility. "Because I'm professional enough to complete a commission," she replied, though the slight tremor in her voice betrayed her. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Of course. Shall we continue then?" They moved through the motions of the previous session. Elizabeth directed him to sit, adjusted his posture, but this time she avoided touching him. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension as she retreated to her canvas. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. Thunder rumbled in the distance. "I've been thinking about you," Dominic said after a long silence, his voice low. About what happened, Elizabeth's brush hesitated above the canvas. It was a mistake. Was it? He stood abruptly, disrupting the pose. Is that truly what you believe? The storm outside intensified, rain now lashing against the glass panes. Lightning flashed, illuminating the hard planes of his face. What I believe doesn't matter, Elizabeth said, setting down her brush. You're married. To a woman who married me for my money and family connections. Dominic moved closer, his steps measured. A woman who hasn't shared my bed in over a year. That doesn't change the facts, Elizabeth whispered, even as she remained rooted in place, watching him approach. The facts, he echoed, now standing before her. Here is a fact, Elizabeth. I haven't felt alive in years until I met you. Another flash of lightning, followed by a crack of thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. The lights flickered once, twice, then plunged the room into shadows, leaving them illuminated only by the storm's sporadic brilliance. Dominic. Her voice was barely audible. His hand rose to cup her cheek, his touch agonizingly gentle. Tell me to stop, he whispered. Tell me to walk away, and I will. Elizabeth knew she should speak those words, draw the line that propriety demanded. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her eyes closing as she surrendered to what she'd wanted since the moment they met. His lips found hers in the semi-darkness, tentative at first, then hungry as she responded. Her arms wound around his neck, pulling him closer as his hands spanned her waist, lifting her effortlessly onto the edge of the desk. Papers scattered to the floor as he stepped between her thighs, deepening the kiss until she moaned against his mouth. I've imagined this, he confessed between kisses, his lips tracing a burning path down her throat. Every night since you walked into my house. Show me, Elizabeth challenged, her hands already working at his tie, her inhibitions swept away by desire too powerful to deny. The next flash of lightning revealed his eyes, dark with need, as he shrugged off his jacket. Her fingers worked the buttons of his shirt, while his hands slid beneath her blouse, caressing the bare skin of her back. Each touch was electric, igniting sensations that had Elizabeth arching into him. Are you certain? Dominic asked, his voice rough as he paused, his forehead pressed against hers. Once we cross this line. In answer, Elizabeth kissed him deeply, her tongue sliding against his as her legs wrapped around his waist. With a groan that seemed torn from his soul, Dominic surrendered to their shared desire. The ancient desk creaked beneath them as clothing gave way to heated skin. His hands and mouth explored her body with reverent hunger, discovering places that made her gasp and tremble. Elizabeth matched his passion, uncovering the sensitive spot at the base of his throat that made him shudder, the ridge of muscle along his back that tensed beneath her exploring fingers. When he finally joined their bodies, the storm reached its own crescendo outside, thunder swallowing Elizabeth's cry of pleasure. They moved together with desperate intensity, her nails scoring his shoulders as he whispered her name against her skin like a prayer. Their release came simultaneously, a shared oblivion that left them clinging to each other in the storm-swept darkness, breathing heavily as reality slowly returned. Dominic cradled her against his chest afterward, his heartbeat gradually slowing beneath her cheek. Neither spoke, the magnitude of what they'd done settling over them like the silence that follows thunder. Eventually, the emergency generator hummed to life, warm light flooding the room once more. Elizabeth blinked, suddenly aware of their dishevelment, the scattered art supplies, the evidence of their passion. She began, moving to disentangle herself from his embrace. Stay, Dominic said, his arms tightening around her. Please. The simple plea undid her resolve. He helped her gather her clothing, his touches now tender rather than urgent. When they were dressed, he led her to the leather sofa near the fireplace, which the butler had lit earlier against the storm's chill. They sat close, Dominic's arm around her shoulders, her head resting in the crook of his neck. Outside, the storm began to recede, the spaces between lightning and thunder lengthening. "Tell me about your scars," Dominic said softly, his fingers tracing the thin silver line near her collarbone that his earlier explorations had revealed. Elizabeth tensed, slightly then relaxed. "My third foster home," she said, her voice distant with memory. "The father drank. He didn't like my drawing, said it was a waste of time. One night he caught me sketching instead of washing dishes. He came at me with a broken bottle." Dominic's arm tightened around her. "How old were you?" 11. She traced the scar herself. "The social worker finally believed me after that. They removed me the next day," his lips pressed against her hair. "I'm sorry. It was a lifetime ago." Elizabeth turned in his arms. "Your turn. The nightmare you mentioned, the one that wakes you most nights?" Dominic's expression darkened. "My father," he said after a moment. "In the dream, I'm always 10 years old again, standing in his study while he explains why I'm not good enough, why I'll never measure up to the Higgins name. And Cassandra. A business arrangement, essentially. Our families have been connected for generations. The marriage united our assets, expanded our holdings. She has her lovers, I have—" He trailed off, looking down at her. "Me," Elizabeth supplied. "I've never done this before," he admitted, his thumb caressing her cheek. "Never been unfaithful, never wanted to be." "And now," she whispered, "now I can't imagine not touching you." His eyes held hers, intense and sincere. "Whatever this is between us, Elizabeth, it's not casual for me. It's not just physical." The vulnerability in his expression made her heart constrict. "It's dangerous," she whispered. "If Cassandra found out—" "She won't," Dominic assured her, though something flickered in his eyes. Doubt, or perhaps fear. "She's rarely here, and when she is, she's too consumed with her own affairs to notice mine." "Affairs," Elizabeth repeated, tasting the bitter word. "Is that what I am?" Dominic cupped her face in his hands. "You are everything I never knew I was missing," he said fiercely. "Everything I never allowed myself to want." Their lips met again, softer now, but no less passionate. Outside, the storm had passed completely, leaving behind a strange, luminous stillness. As Elizabeth surrendered once more to Dominic's embrace, she pushed away the nagging voice of warning in her mind, choosing instead to drown in the intoxicating present, blind to the gathering clouds on their horizon, clouds far more dangerous than any storm. Chapter 3. Secret Rendezvous. The garden cottage stood half-hidden among ancient oak trees at the farthest edge of the Higgins estate. Originally the groundskeeper's residence, it had been abandoned for years, until Dominic had it quietly renovated. Now, with its stone walls and thatched roof, it provided the perfect sanctuary for forbidden desires. Elizabeth traced lazy patterns on Dominic's bare chest as they lay entwined on the cottage's four-poster bed. Outside, twilight painted the sky in deepening shades of purple. They had been meeting like this for 3 weeks now, stolen hours of passion carved from their separate lives. "I should be working on your portrait," she murmured, pressing her lips to the hollow of his throat. "At this rate, it will never be finished." Dominic's laugh rumbled beneath her cheek. "Perhaps that's my devious plan, to keep you here indefinitely." His hand caressed the curve of her spine, fingers dancing along each vertebra. The mysterious Mr. Higgins, finally revealed as a master manipulator, Elizabeth teased, lifting herself to gaze down at him. His dark hair was tousled from her fingers, his jaw shadowed with stubble that had left delicious burns along her inner thighs. She had never seen anything more beautiful than Dominic Higgins undone by passion. He captured her hands, bringing them to his lips. "Only you see me like this," he whispered against her knuckles. "Only you know who I really am." The raw honesty in his voice made Elizabeth's chest tighten. What had begun as forbidden attraction had deepened into something neither had anticipated, something dangerously close to love. "Tell me about your dreams," she said, settling against his side, her head tucked beneath his chin. "Not the nightmares, the other ones." Dominic was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. "I dream of simplicity," he finally said, his voice soft in the gathering darkness. "A small house by the sea, waking up to the same face every morning, growing old with someone who knows all my flaws and loves me anyway. Not the billionaire fantasy after all." "Money builds walls, Elizabeth. It doesn't create happiness." His arms tightened around her. "What about you? What does Elizabeth Lale dream of?" She closed her eyes, allowing herself to imagine. A studio filled with light, children laughing, someone to share it all with. She hesitated, then added, "Someone like you." The dangerous words hung between them. Dominic turned, gathering her beneath him, his eyes intense in the dimness. "Don't say things like that unless you mean them." "I do mean it," Elizabeth whispered, reaching up to trace the sharp angle of his jaw. "That's what terrifies me." His kiss was deep and consuming, igniting the fire that seemed to burn perpetually between them. Elizabeth surrendered to his touch, her body arching as his mouth traveled down her throat to her breasts. His hands, those elegant, powerful hands that commanded an empire, trembled slightly as they caressed her skin, awakening sensations that left her gasping. "I need you," he murmured against her heated flesh. "Always, I need you." They moved together with practiced intimacy now, knowing each other's bodies, the rhythms that would bring the most pleasure. Yet each time felt new, a rediscovery of connection that transcended the physical. When they joined, Elizabeth wound her legs around his waist, pulling him deeper, wanting to absorb him into her very being. Their climax came simultaneously, waves of pleasure that left them shuddering in each other's arms, breathless and complete. Afterward, they lay tangled together, neither willing to break the spell with words. Eventually, reality intruded. The grandfather clock in the cottage living room chimed 9 times, its sound mournful in the quiet. "Cassandra returns tomorrow," Dominic said, the name falling between them like a stone in still water. Elizabeth tensed. 3 weeks of bliss while Cassandra traveled abroad for various social engagements. 3 weeks of pretending the outside world didn't exist. "Will she suspect?" she asked, sitting up and wrapping the sheet around her body, suddenly feeling exposed. Dominic's expression hardened. "Cassandra only notices what affects her directly. Our marriage is a facade maintained for social appearances. She has her companions. As long as I don't embarrass her publicly, she doesn't concern herself with my activities." "That sounds lonely," Elizabeth said softly. It was. He sat up beside her, pulling her close again. "Until you." They dressed slowly, reluctantly. Each button fastened, each garment replaced, was a step back toward their separate realities. As Elizabeth pinned up her hair, she caught Dominic watching her in the antique mirror, his expression unreadable. "What?" she asked. He approached, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. "I was thinking how right you look here, how perfectly you fit into my life." The words sent a shiver of longing through her. "Dominic!" "I know," he sighed, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I know what you're going to say, that this can't last, that we're living in a fantasy." "Aren't we?" Elizabeth turned in his arms. "Your wife returns tomorrow. You'll sleep in the same house. Perhaps the same bed." "Never," he interrupted fiercely. "We haven't shared a bed in over a year. Cassandra maintains the fiction of our marriage for her social standing and access to my fortune, nothing more. And yet you remain married to her. Dominic's jaw tightened. The prenuptial agreement was ironclad. If I leave her without cause, she gets half of everything, not just my personal wealth, but controlling interest in the family holdings. Thousands of employees would be affected. She knows this and has made it clear she would dismantle everything out of spite. So we continue like this, meeting in secret? For how long? Elizabeth stepped away, creating distance between them. Not forever, Dominic said, his voice low and intense. I've been working with lawyers to find a solution, a way to protect what matters without giving her the satisfaction of destruction. He crossed to her, taking her hands in his. Give me time. Elizabeth, please. The raw plea in his voice undid her resistance. She nodded, unable to deny him, unable to deny her own heart. As they walked back through the moonlit garden toward the main house where her car waited, Elizabeth felt a prickling sensation on the back of her neck, the feeling of being watched. She turned, suddenly scanning the shadows between the ancient trees. What is it? Dominic asked, following her gaze. Nothing, she said, unsettled. Just my imagination. But later, as she drove back to her apartment, the sensation lingered, and when she arrived home, she found a white envelope slid under her door. Inside was a single black rose, its petals velvety and perfect, along with a note written in elegant script. He will tire of you as he tires of all his little diversions. Enjoy his bed while you can. Elizabeth's hands trembled as she dropped the note, the black rose falling to the floor like an omen. Somewhere in the city, someone knew their secret. Someone was watching, and that someone wanted her to know she was playing a dangerous game, one where the rules and the consequences remained ominously unclear. Chapter 4. Dangerous Obsession. The Higgins family dining room resembled a museum more than a place where people gathered to eat. Priceless artwork adorned walls covered in hand-painted silk. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across a table that could seat 20, and ancestral portraits watched with judgmental eyes as Dominic sat rigidly at one end, Cassandra at the other. Between them, 12 feet of polished mahogany stretched like an ocean of separation. Their dinner had proceeded in the same cold silence that characterized most of their interactions. The only sounds, the occasional clink of silver. Against fine china and the discreet movements of the staff, Cassandra dabbed her lips with a linen napkin, her diamond bracelet catching the light. At 40, she was still beautiful in a sharp, glacial way. Her blonde hair perfectly styled, her features aristocratic, her figure maintained through ruthless discipline. But her beauty had always left Dominic cold, lacking the warmth and authenticity he found so compelling in Elizabeth. "Henderson, please bring the champagne," Cassandra instructed the butler, her voice carrying the crisp edge of command. Dominic raised an eyebrow. "What's the occasion?" Cassandra's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Can't a wife celebrate her husband's company without reason?" The butler returned with a bottle of Krug in an ice bucket, pouring the golden liquid into flutes. When they were alone, again Cassandra raised her glass. "To family," she said pointedly, "and its continuation." Something in her tone made Dominic wary. He sipped the champagne without returning the toast. "I visited Dr. Reinhardt while in Geneva," Cassandra continued, watching him over the rim of her glass. "I received some rather significant news." Dominic set down his flute, a prickle of unease crawling up his spine. "I'm pregnant, Dominic." The words fell like stones into still water. 12 weeks along. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Dominic gripped the edge of the table, his mind racing. "That's impossible." Cassandra's laugh shattered the silence like thin ice breaking. "I assure you, it's quite possible," she said, her voice honeyed with triumph. "You may recall our anniversary. Night 3 months ago, after the benefit at the Metropolitan, you had rather a lot to drink." Dominic did remember that night. The one night in over a year when he'd fulfilled what Cassandra coldly called his marital obligations. It had been mechanical, loveless, both of them simply going through expected motions. And afterward, he had felt nothing but emptiness. "You didn't mention that I'd stopped my contraception." Cassandra shrugged one elegant shoulder. "It didn't seem relevant at the time. And now, here we are." She placed her hand on her still flat stomach in a gesture that seemed rehearsed rather than maternal. The Higgins heir at last. Dominic's mind whirled with implications. A child, his child, growing inside a woman he didn't love. A woman who would use that child as the ultimate chain binding him to a marriage that existed only on paper. "You don't seem pleased," Cassandra observed, her voice hardening. "One might think you'd be delighted to finally have an heir. It's unexpected," he managed. Cassandra took another sip of champagne, then set down her glass with deliberate care. "Almost as unexpected as your little affair with the artist." Dominic felt his blood freeze. "What are you talking about? Please." Cassandra's perfectly manicured, and waved dismissively. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice? The way your eyes follow her, the late nights you claim to spend at the office, the cottage at the edge of the property suddenly receiving electricity again." Her cold blue eyes fixed on him. "I know everything that happens on my estate, Dominic. Everything." He struggled to keep his expression neutral, to betray nothing of the panic rising within him. "You've never cared about my activities before. I've never been carrying your child before." Cassandra's smile was predatory. "Things change. You have your own companions," Dominic said carefully. "Yes, and I'll continue to do so," she replied with startling candor. "The difference is that I'm discreet. I don't bring shame to the Higgins name. I don't flaunt my indiscretions with common little nobodies who would be dazzled by your wealth." Anger flared hot in Dominic's chest. "Don't speak about her that way." Something dangerous gleamed in Cassandra's eyes. "Ah, so it's like that, is it? You actually care for the girl." She leaned forward. "Let me make something absolutely clear, Dominic. If you leave me, if you even think about divorce, I will take everything. Not just half your fortune as stipulated in our prenup, but your child as well. I will drag your name through the courts. I will make sure everyone knows how you abandoned your pregnant wife for your whore." "You wouldn't use an innocent child that way," Dominic said, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew they were false. Cassandra would use any weapon available to maintain her position. "Wouldn't I?" She stood, smoothing her designer dress over her abdomen. "End it with her, today, or I will destroy her." She walked toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and I took the liberty of inviting her to complete your portrait here at the house. I told her I wanted to oversee the final stages. Personally, she'll be arriving tomorrow at 10. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded to Dominic like the lock on a prison cell. Elizabeth stared at her phone, reading Cassandra's text message for the third time. The request, or rather, the command, to continue the portrait sessions at the mansion under Cassandra's supervision sent ice through her veins. Something had changed. Something was wrong. She tried calling Dominic, but his phone went straight to voicemail. 3 hours passed with no response to her increasingly worried messages. Finally, unable to bear the uncertainty, she drove to the garden cottage where they had arranged to meet that evening. The cottage stood dark and empty, no sign of Dominic's presence. Elizabeth used the key he had given her, entering the silent space that still held echoes of their passion. She switched on a lamp, and her breath caught in her throat. On the small dining table lay a crisp white envelope with her name written. In Dominic's distinctive handwriting, with trembling fingers, she opened it. "Elizabeth, What we've shared these past weeks has been more meaningful than I can express. But circumstances have arisen that make it impossible for us to continue. Cassandra is pregnant. I have responsibilities I cannot ignore. Please forgive me, and please forget me. It's better for us both. Elizabeth read the words once, twice, a third time, each reading sending fresh waves of pain through her chest. Pregnant. Cassandra was pregnant, and Dominic had chosen his duty over what they shared. She sank into a chair, the letter clutched in her hand as silent tears tracked down her cheeks. How foolish she had been to believe they could have a future, to imagine herself as anything more than a temporary diversion for a man bound by wealth and obligation. The soft click of the cottage door startled her. Elizabeth looked up, hope flaring. Briefly, only to be extinguished as Cassandra Higgins stepped into the room. "How quaint," Cassandra said, her cold gaze taking in the cottage interior. "I can see why he found it." "Rustic." Elizabeth rose unsteadily. "What are you doing here? I wanted to see it for myself, the little love nest where my husband has been entertaining his latest amusement." Cassandra moved further into the room, trailing her fingers along surfaces, as if checking for dust. "He's had others, you know. You're not the first, won't be the last, I imagine, even with the baby coming." Each word was a knife, twisting in Elizabeth's heart. "I'd like you to leave." Cassandra's laughter held no warmth. "You'd like me to leave? This is my property, Miss Lale. Everything here belongs to me." Her eyes raked over Elizabeth dismissively. "Everything? Dominic is not a possession," Elizabeth said, finding strength in her anger. "No." Cassandra raised a perfectly arched eyebrow. "Then why did he come back to me so easily? Why did he write that letter?" She gestured to the paper still clutched in Elizabeth's hand. "One word from me about the baby, and he couldn't get away from you fast enough. I don't believe you. Believe what you like." Cassandra moved closer, her expensive perfume suffocating in the small space. "But know this, Dominic will always choose his legacy over a temporary infatuation. The Higgins name means everything to him, and now I carry the next Higgins heir." She reached out, her cold fingers brushing Elizabeth's cheek in a gesture that felt more like a threat than a caress. "You have talent, I'll grant you that. Finish the portrait as agreed. Get paid, then disappear from our lives." Her voice hardened. "Because if you don't, I will make sure you never work in this city again. The art world is small, and my influence is considerable." Elizabeth jerked away from her touch. "I don't respond to threats." "It's not a threat, dear. It's a promise." Cassandra moved toward the door. 10 o'clock tomorrow. Don't be late." She paused at the threshold. "And do try to look less emotional. No one appreciates a portrait artist with puffy eyes." After she left, Elizabeth collapsed onto the cottage sofa, her body shaking with silent sobs. The note in her hand crumpled as she curled into herself, trying to contain the pain that threatened to tear her apart from within. Hours later, as she dragged herself back to her car, the vibration of her phone briefly kindled hope. But the message waiting wasn't from Dominic. It was another anonymous text, the third she'd received that week. "Did you really think he would choose you over his dynasty? Poor little artist, playing with fire. Some games end in ashes." Elizabeth stared at the screen, a chill seeping into her bones that had nothing to do with the night air. Someone was watching her, someone knew everything. And as she drove home through the darkened streets, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had stepped into a trap from which there would be no easy escape. When she arrived at her apartment, her phone rang. Dominic's name flashed on the screen. Her heart leapt, but she hesitated before answering. "Elizabeth." His voice was strained. "I just heard. Cassandra's fallen down the main staircase at the mansion. She's being taken to the hospital." "Is she all right?" Elizabeth asked, surprised by her own concern. "I don't know. She's claiming—" He paused. She's naming you as her attacker. That's absurd. I haven't been near your house since— I know, he cut her off. I believe you, but the police will want to speak with you. As Dominic ended the call, his phone immediately rang again. He checked the screen, his expression shifting to something Elizabeth couldn't decipher through the phone. Recognition mixed with wariness based on his tone. I can't talk now, he said tersely to the caller. This isn't the time. Elizabeth heard a muffled male voice on the other end, though she couldn't make out the words. No, you don't understand, Dominic continued, his voice dropping. She's involved, Elizabeth, now. It's happening again. The call ended abruptly. Who was that? Elizabeth asked. No one, Dominic replied too quickly. Just business. She didn't believe him, but there were more pressing concerns. Dominic, what did you mean about it happening again? I have to go, he said, avoiding her question. Stay where you are. Don't speak to anyone until I can get my attorney to you. As he hung up, Elizabeth was left with more questions than answers. Who had Dominic been speaking to? What did he mean by happening again? And how had she become entangled in a web that seemed to have been spinning long before she ever met Dominic Higgins? Chapter 5. Sinister Web. Elizabeth sat rigidly in the Higgins mansion's grand salon, her easel positioned to capture Dominic's portrait in the most flattering light. For the past 2 hours, she had worked in excruciating silence under Cassandra's watchful gaze. The woman lounged on an antique chaise, one hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach, her eyes never leaving Elizabeth. The resemblance is remarkable, Cassandra commented, rising to inspect the portrait. You've captured his intensity. She pronounced the word with deliberate suggestion. Elizabeth said nothing, focusing on her brushwork while observing Cassandra surreptitiously. Something about the woman's behavior had been nagging at her all morning. For someone supposedly 12 weeks pregnant, Cassandra showed no signs of the typical first trimester symptoms. No morning sickness, no subtle pallor, no food aversions. In fact, Elizabeth had noticed Cassandra discreetly sipping from a silver flask earlier, hardly typical behavior for an expectant mother. I believe we've made sufficient progress for today, Cassandra announced, checking her diamond-encrusted watch. I have a prenatal appointment. Dominic, you'll drive me. I have meetings scheduled all afternoon, he replied, speaking for the first time. Cancel them. Cassandra's tone left no room for argument. This is your child we're discussing. The pointed reminder hung heavily in the air. Dominic's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. Miss Lyle can see herself out, Cassandra added, her smile coldly triumphant. Same time tomorrow. As they left, Elizabeth began gathering her supplies, but paused when she heard Cassandra's voice drift back from the hallway. I need to retrieve something from my study first. Wait for me in the car. Dominic's footsteps retreated, while Cassandra's heels clicked in another direction. Acting on instinct, Elizabeth slipped into the corridor, following at a safe distance. If she was caught, she could claim she was looking for a bathroom. Cassandra entered a room at the end of the hallway. Through the partially open door, Elizabeth watched as she opened a wall safe hidden behind a small painting. From it, Cassandra removed a prescription bottle, swallowing a pill dry before returning the medication to the safe. Elizabeth retreated quickly, making her way back to the salon. Her mind raced. What medication was Cassandra taking? Why keep it locked in a safe rather than in a bathroom cabinet? When she returned to her apartment, Elizabeth began researching pregnancy symptoms and medications. After an hour of reading medical websites, she sat back, suspicions forming like storm clouds. Certain hormonal treatments could mimic early pregnancy symptoms. Without proper medical confirmation, such a deception would be relatively simple to maintain in the short term. Her phone vibrated with an incoming text from an unknown number. The child isn't his. The pregnancy is a lie. Check her medical records. At Westbrook Fertility Clinic. Password, Cassandra 1979. Elizabeth stared at the screen, pulse quickening. The message confirmed her growing suspicions, but raised new questions. Who would send this? And how would they have access to such information? Rather than accepting the information blindly, Elizabeth decided to look for more evidence. She recalled Cassandra mentioning her obstetrician, Dr. Reinhardt. A quick search revealed he wasn't affiliated with any major hospital in the city, unusual for a physician handling a high-risk pregnancy for a woman of Cassandra's age and social standing. Driven by her mounting doubts, Elizabeth found herself in an internet cafe 3 blocks from her apartment, using a public computer to access the clinic's patient portal. Her hands trembled as she entered the credentials, the records loaded, displaying a history that made her blood run cold. Cassandra had been a patient at the clinic for 5 years, multiple failed IVF attempts, and the most recent entry, dated just 2 weeks ago. Patient to continue hormonal therapy to maintain false pregnancy symptoms per request. Elizabeth printed the records with shaking hands, her mind whirling. Cassandra was lying about the pregnancy. But why? To trap Dominic? To separate them? Back in her apartment, Elizabeth spread the papers across her small dining table, trying to make sense of it all. Another text arrived. She's done this before. Look up Natalie Voss, 2018, Caroline Lambert, 2015. Driven by morbid curiosity, Elizabeth searched the names. What she found chilled her to the bone. Natalie Voss, former assistant to Cassandra Higgins, hospitalized after a suspicious fall downstairs that left her paralyzed. Accusations against Cassandra withdrawn after a substantial settlement. Caroline Lambert, interior designer once linked romantically to Dominic. Career ruined after accusations of theft from wealthy clients. Committed suicide 6 months later. There were others. A gallery owner who refused to display Cassandra's mediocre paintings. A social rival who secured a charity chairmanship Cassandra coveted. All had suffered mysterious accidents or reputation destruction. The pattern was clear and terrifying. Anyone who crossed Cassandra Higgins was systematically destroyed. The doorbell rang, startling Elizabeth from her dark discoveries. Heart pounding, she approached the door cautiously and peered through the peephole. Dominic stood in the hallway, his face haggard with exhaustion and worry. She opened the door, but blocked his entrance. "You shouldn't be here. I had to see you." His voice was rough with emotion. "What Cassandra is doing, forcing you to come to the house, making you witness her performance, it's cruel. Is that what concerns you? Her cruelty to me?" Elizabeth's voice shook with barely contained anger. "Not the fact that you abandoned me with nothing but a letter that you couldn't even tell me to my face?" "She gave me no choice." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "She threatened to destroy you if I didn't end things, and you believed her. I know what she's capable of." His eyes were haunted. "I've seen it before." Elizabeth stepped aside, allowing him to enter. Once inside, he seemed to deflate, the polished billionaire facade crumbling to reveal the man beneath, wounded, conflicted, exhausted. "The pregnancy," Elizabeth said carefully. "Is it real?" Dominic's head snapped up. "What do you mean?" Wordlessly, she handed him the fertility clinic records. He read them, his expression shifting from confusion to shock to cold fury. "She's been lying," Elizabeth explained quietly. "I suspected something was off when I noticed she drinks from a flask she keeps hidden in her purse. No morning sickness, no food aversions, no fatigue. I started researching and found Dr. Reinhardt isn't even affiliated with a proper hospital. Then these records confirmed everything." "How did you get these?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "Someone sent me the login information. The same person who told me about Natalie Voss and Caroline Lambert." She gestured to the research spread across her table. Dominic moved to the window, his back to her, shoulders rigid with tension. I suspected something wasn't right. The timing was too convenient. She refused to let me accompany her to doctor appointments. But this, he turned, his eyes dark with rage. This is a new level, even for Cassandra. Why would she fake a pregnancy? Control. His voice was bitter. It's always about control with her, the ultimate way to keep me bound to her. Elizabeth wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the apartment. She's dangerous, Dominic. These women, what happened to them, it wasn't coincidence. He crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms. She resisted for a moment, then surrendered to the embrace she had craved since their separation. I'm sorry, he whispered against her hair. I thought I was protecting you. I was a coward. What happens now? She asked, her voice muffled against his chest. I confront her with what we know. End this charade once and for all. Elizabeth pulled back to look at him. Do you think that's wise? If she's willing to go this far, what choice do I have? Live this lie indefinitely? His hands cupped her face. I want a future with you, Elizabeth. A real future. His lips found hers in a kiss that ignited all the passion they had suppressed during their separation. Weeks of longing, of grief, of anger, channeled into desperate need. Her fingers tangled in his hair as his hands moved beneath her sweater, caressing the bare skin of her back, relearning the contours of her body. They made their way to her bedroom, in a tangle of discarded clothing and breathless kisses. When he laid her on the bed, his eyes roamed over her with reverent hunger. I missed you, he confessed, his voice breaking. Every moment, every day. Show me, she whispered, pulling him down to her. Their lovemaking was different this time, raw with renewed need, yet tender with the knowledge of how easily they could have lost each other. Elizabeth surrendered completely, her body arching into his touch as he worshipped her with lips and hands. When they joined, the pleasure was so intense it bordered on pain, each thrust a reclaiming, each gasp a promise. Afterward, they lay entwined, Elizabeth's head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. The afternoon sun cast golden light across their bodies as Dominic traced idle patterns on her bare shoulder. I'll speak with my lawyers tomorrow, he said quietly. With evidence of her deception, the prenuptial agreement can be challenged. She won't get the controlling interest she's threatened to use. And us? Elizabeth asked, propping herself up to look at him. His smile was gentle as he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Us is simple. I love you, Elizabeth. I want to build a life with you, if you'll have me. The words she had longed to hear. Yet before she could respond, Dominic's phone rang. His expression darkened as he checked the screen. It's Henderson, my butler, he answered, his free arm still wrapped around Elizabeth. As he listened, his body tensed. When? Is she conscious? Yes, I'll be there immediately. He hung up, his face ashen. What is it? Elizabeth asked, dread pooling in her stomach. Cassandra. His voice was hollow. She's fallen down the main staircase at the mansion. She's being taken to the hospital. Now. A chill ran through Elizabeth that had nothing to do with her nakedness. Fallen or pushed, Dominic's haunted eyes met hers. Henderson says she was alone, but what? Just before I left, she was threatening to expose your past, to destroy your career. She said she had evidence linking your mother to a scandal involving my father. Elizabeth sat up, clutching the sheet to her chest. My mother, I barely remember her. She disappeared when I was 5. Exactly. Dominic reached for his discarded clothes. She was fishing for a reaction. When I didn't give her one, she became enraged. As they hurriedly dressed, a terrible suspicion formed in Elizabeth's mind. The anonymous texts, the fertility clinic password. Someone close to Cassandra wanted her secrets exposed. Dominic, she said slowly, I think we're being played. All of us. Someone wants Cassandra exposed, you freed from the marriage, and me—" "You what?" he asked, pausing as he buttoned his shirt. Elizabeth shook her head, unable to articulate. "The growing dread. I don't know, but this feels orchestrated, like we're being manipulated towards some endgame we can't see." Dominic's phone chimed with a text. He read it, his expression hardening. "Cassandra's awake. She's claiming she was pushed." His eyes met Elizabeth's, dark with worry. "And she's naming you as her attacker." Chapter 6. The Poisoned Cup. The hospital. Corridor smelled of antiseptic and artificial flowers. Elizabeth hesitated outside Cassandra's private room, her heart pounding against her ribs like a caged bird. After Cassandra's accusation, Dominic had insisted they face this together. He stood beside her now, his face set in determined lines. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Yes, I do." Elizabeth squared her shoulders. "If I run, it only makes me look guilty." The door opened before they could knock. A nurse exited, giving them a curious glance before continuing down the hall. Taking a deep breath, Elizabeth stepped into the room with Dominic close behind her. Cassandra reclined against plumped pillows, looking remarkably composed for someone who had supposedly tumbled down a flight of marble stairs. Her blonde hair was artfully arranged, her face expertly made up. Only the hospital gown and the IV in her arm betrayed her patient status. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with venom, "the adulterers arrived together. How fitting." "Enough, Cassandra," Dominic said wearily. "The police found no evidence of anyone else in the house when you fell. The security system confirms it." "Perhaps your little artist has a key," Cassandra suggested, her cold eyes fixed on Elizabeth. "Or perhaps you disabled the system for her." "We know about the fake pregnancy," Elizabeth said quietly. Cassandra's composure slipped for just a moment. A flash of genuine shock quickly masked by calculation. "I don't know what you're talking about." Dominic stepped forward. "We have your medical records from Westbrook Fertility Clinic, the hormonal treatments to simulate pregnancy symptoms, the failed IVF attempts, all of it. You accessed my private medical records?" Cassandra's voice rose, her hand clutching the call button. "That's illegal." "So is insurance fraud," Dominic countered. "Which is what you've committed by checking into this hospital under false pretenses of prenatal concerns." Cassandra's eyes narrowed to glacial slits. "You have no proof those records are authentic." "My lawyers are meeting with the clinic directors tomorrow," Dominic said, his voice level. "A subpoena for the official records is being prepared as we speak." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Cassandra's perfect features. She released the call button, her mind visibly working behind her calculated mask. "What do you want?" she finally asked. "A divorce," Dominic replied without hesitation. "Clean, quiet, and immediate. You'll receive the settlement outlined in our prenup for a no-fault divorce, the vacation home in Aspen, $5 million in cash, and your jewelry collection. In return, you'll drop this ridiculous accusation against Elizabeth and leave us both alone." Cassandra's laughter held no humor. "You think I'll walk away with crumbs when I'm entitled to half of everything?" "You're entitled to nothing," Dominic's voice hardened. "The prenup clearly states that any attempt to defraud me nullifies your rights to the larger settlement. The fake pregnancy qualifies." A dangerous stillness came over Cassandra. She studied Elizabeth with the cold assessment of a predator selecting its prey. "I'd like to speak with Miss Lale, alone." "Absolutely not," Dominic replied immediately. "It's all right," Elizabeth said, touching his arm. "I can handle this." Doubt clouded his features. "Elizabeth, please." She met his gaze steadily. "Trust me." After a long moment, he nodded reluctantly. "I'll be right outside." When the door closed behind him, Cassandra's demeanor shifted. The icy hauteur melted into something more calculating, more intimate. "Tea," she offered, gesturing to a porcelain service on the side table. "The hospital food is atrocious, but they allowed my housekeeper to bring this from home." Elizabeth hesitated. "Oh, please." Cassandra rolled her eyes as she poured 2 cups. "If I wanted to harm you, I'd choose a less obvious method than poisoning you in my hospital room." Reluctantly, Elizabeth accepted the delicate cup, but didn't drink. "You know," Cassandra said conversationally, sipping her own tea, "you remind me of someone from long ago, a woman who worked for Dominic's father. Beautiful, ambitious, from humble origins. She, too, thought she could rise above her station. Through a powerful man's bed." Elizabeth stiffened. "I'm not interested in your attempts to insult me." "It's not an insult, it's a warning." Cassandra set down her cup with deliberate care. "Her name was Christine Lyle, your mother, I believe." The teacup trembled in Elizabeth's hand. "What do you know about my mother?" Cassandra's smile was a cold slash across her perfect face. "Everything, including why she disappeared when you were 5 years old." Elizabeth's mouth went dry. Her earliest memories were of her mother. Warm brown eyes, gentle hands, the scent of turpentine and flowers. Then one day she simply vanished. No goodbye, no explanation. Just emptiness and a series of foster homes. "You're lying." "Am I?" Cassandra reached for a leather portfolio beside her bed. "Christine Lyle, hired as a secretary for Richard Higgins, Dominic's father, in 1992, became his mistress within months, demanded money to keep silent about their affair when his wife, Dominic's mother, was diagnosed with cancer." She extracted a photograph, sliding it across the bedside table. "Recognize her?" Elizabeth's hands shook as she picked up the photo. A younger version of her mother stood beside an older man with Dominic's unmistakable features. They were laughing together, her mother's head tilted toward him in unmistakable intimacy. "Where did you get this?" "Family archives," Cassandra replied, smoothly. "The Higgins keep meticulous records, especially of potential threats." "What happened to her?" Elizabeth whispered. Unable to tear her eyes from the photograph, "She disappeared." Cassandra's voice held mock sympathy. "After a particularly nasty confrontation with Richard, such a shame. The police had so many questions for him." Horror crept through Elizabeth's veins like ice water. "Are you suggesting that Dominic's beloved father was responsible for your mother's disappearance?" Cassandra shrugged one elegant shoulder. "I'm not suggesting anything. Merely sharing family history you might find relevant." Elizabeth set down her untouched tea with a shaking hand. "Why are you telling me this?" "To help you understand the family you're so eager to join." Cassandra leaned forward, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "The Higgins men desire what they cannot have. Once they possess it, the thrill fades. Richard tired of your mother. Dominic will tire of you." "You don't know anything about Dominic and me. I know everything about him." Cassandra's eyes gleamed with malice, including his darkest impulses. "Did he tell you about the girl at Harvard who accused him of stalking? Or the model in Paris who took out a restraining order? The Higgins fortune has buried many inconvenient truths." Doubt, unwelcome but persistent, crept into Elizabeth's mind. How well did she really know Dominic? Behind the passion, behind the tenderness, who was he truly? "Walk away," Cassandra advised, picking up her teacup again. "Take a generous settlement, I'll see to it personally, and disappear, before history repeats itself." Elizabeth stood, needing distance from this woman and her poisonous words. "Why would you offer me money to leave if what you're saying is true? If Dominic will tire of me anyway?" "Insurance," Cassandra replied simply. "I've invested too much in the Higgins name to see it tarnished by another scandalous affair with another Lyle woman." As Elizabeth moved toward the door, Cassandra called after her, "Think about it, Elizabeth. Money and safety, or passion and uncertainty. You have until tomorrow to decide." In the hallway, Elizabeth leaned against the wall, struggling to process what she just heard. Could it be true? Had Dominic's father been involved with her mother? Could he have been responsible for her disappearance? Dominic approached from the nurse's station, concern etched on his features. "What happened? You're pale as a ghost." Before she could answer, a commotion erupted from Cassandra's room. A harsh cry, followed by the sound of breaking porcelain. Dominic pushed past Elizabeth, throwing open the door. Cassandra lay convulsing on the bed, tea spilled across the pristine sheets. Her back arched in a grotesque angle, foam speckling her lips as she gasped for breath. The monitoring equipment shrieked warnings as her vital signs spiraled. "Help!" Dominic shouted, lunging for the emergency call button. "Something's wrong!" Medical personnel flooded the room, pushing them into the corridor as they fought to stabilize Cassandra. Through the doorway, Elizabeth caught glimpses of organized chaos. Doctors barking orders, nurses administering injections, machines beeping urgently. What happened? A security guard appeared, his expression suspicious as he surveyed Elizabeth. "I don't know," she stammered. "We were talking and then—" She drank her tea and collapsed, Dominic finished, his arm protectively around Elizabeth's shoulders. The guard's eyes narrowed. "And you two are?" "I'm her husband," Dominic said. "This is my friend." Something in his hesitation sent a pang through Elizabeth's heart, despite the crisis unfolding. Hours passed in the sterile waiting room. Dominic paced, while Elizabeth sat rigid with shock, her mind replaying Cassandra's revelations and insinuations. Finally, a grim-faced doctor emerged. "Mr. Higgins," he said, "your wife is stabilized, but it was a close call." "What happened?" Dominic asked. The doctor's expression grew more severe. "Preliminary toxicology indicates poison in her system. A rare compound derived from a plant called monkshood. The police have been notified." "Poison," Dominic repeated incredulously. "That's impossible." "The evidence suggests otherwise," the doctor replied. "They're treating her room as a crime scene." As if summoned by his words, 2 police officers approached, their expressions grave. "Mr. Higgins," the taller one began, "we need to ask you." "And Miss Lyle," Elizabeth supplied, her voice barely audible. "Elizabeth Lyle." The officer's eyebrows rose in recognition. "Miss Lyle, we need to ask you both some questions about the events leading up to Mrs. Higgins' collapse." Elizabeth felt the weight of their scrutiny like a physical burden. As they were led to separate interview rooms, a hospital security guard approached, holding a clear evidence bag containing a small vial. "Detective," he called, "forensics found this in the woman's purse." He nodded toward Elizabeth. The detective examined the vial through the plastic. A small amount of dark liquid clung to the interior. "Miss Lyle," he said, his voice hardening, "would you care to explain why you're carrying aconite extract in your purse, the same substance found in Mrs. Higgins's tea?" Elizabeth stared at the vial in horror. "That's not mine," she whispered. "I've never seen it before." The officer's expression made it clear he didn't believe her. "Elizabeth Lyle, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of Cassandra Higgins. You have the right to remain silent." As the Miranda rights were recited in a monotone, Elizabeth caught a final glimpse of Dominic's face. Shock, confusion, and something that broke her heart. Doubt. The handcuffs closed around her wrists with cold finality as Cassandra's words echoed in her mind. Money and safety, or passion and uncertainty. Had she chosen wrong? Had she been manipulated from the beginning? As they led her away, Elizabeth couldn't shake the feeling that she had stepped into a trap years in the making, one that had claimed her mother before her and would now claim her as well. Chapter 7. Behind Prison Walls. The stench hit Elizabeth first, a suffocating blend of industrial disinfectant, unwashed bodies, and despair. She sat motionless on the thin mattress of her cell, watching dust motes dance in the shaft of sunlight that filtered through the small, barred window. 3 days had passed since her arrest. 3 days of fingerprinting, strip searches, and dehumanizing routines. 3 days of her mind cycling between numbness and terror. Sleep came in short, fitful bursts, punctuated by the cacophony of prison life, metal doors clanging, guards shouting, other inmates crying or arguing. In those dark hours, Elizabeth found herself mapping the cracks in the ceiling above her bunk, counting them like sheep, desperate for distraction from the thought that this concrete box might become her world for the next 15 years. Her court-appointed attorney, a harried woman with perpetually smudged glasses, had laid out her situation with brutal efficiency. The poison found in her possession matched what was in Cassandra's tea. The security footage showed Elizabeth alone with the victim. She had clear motive as the other woman. Without substantial contradictory evidence, conviction was almost certain. 1 hour yard time, Lyle. The guard's bark startled Elizabeth from her spiral of dread. She rose mechanically, allowing herself to be handcuffed, and led through a maze of corridors to an outdoor enclosure topped with razor wire. The spring air felt obscenely fresh after the recycled miasma of the cell block. Elizabeth tilted her face toward the sun, closing her eyes against its brightness, imagining for a fleeting moment that she was in Dominic's garden cottage, waiting for his familiar footsteps on the path. "First-timer, ain't you?" Elizabeth turned to find a weathered woman watching her with knowing eyes. The woman's arms were etched with faded tattoos, her hair an improbable shade of orange. "Is it that obvious?" Elizabeth asked. "You still got hope in your eyes." The woman chuckled without humor. "Give it time." Elizabeth wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly chilled despite the sunlight. "I didn't do what they say I did. Honey, no one in here did." The woman's smile revealed a missing incisor. "I'm Ruby, 15 months into a 5-year stretch for something my boyfriend did." "Elizabeth," she replied automatically, before remembering that names were currency here, identities to be guarded. "I know who you are," Ruby said. "The artist who poisoned that rich bitch. Whole block's talking about it." Elizabeth flinched. "I didn't poison anyone," Ruby shrugged. "Don't matter what's true in here, only matters what they can prove." She glanced around furtively before leaning closer. "Word is, someone put a price on your head. Seems the lady you allegedly poisoned has friends inside." A cold knot of fear settled in Elizabeth's stomach. "What are you talking about?" "Just watch your back," Ruby advised, drifting away as a guard approached. "Lyle. Visitor." Elizabeth followed, hollow-eyed and exhausted, to the visitors' area. Beyond the scratched plexiglass partition, Dominic waited. The sight of him, impeccably dressed yet clearly haggard, with shadows beneath his eyes and stubble darkening his jaw, sent a wave of longing through her so intense it bordered on physical pain. She sat, lifting the receiver with trembling fingers. "You came. Did you think I wouldn't?" His voice, even distorted by the cheap intercom, washed over her like a balm. I didn't know what to think. She fought to keep her voice steady. "They found poison in my bag, Dominic. Poison I never saw before." "I know." His grey eyes held hers with unwavering intensity. "I believe you, Elizabeth. I've hired Harrison Wells to represent you." Elizabeth's breath caught. Harrison Wells was the most sought-after criminal defense attorney in the country, with a legendary record of impossible victories and a retainer rumored to be in the 7 figures. "How is she?" Elizabeth asked, hating that she cared, yet needing to know. "Recovering, making the most of her role as the victimized wife." Bitterness laced his words. "The press is having a field day. The billionaire, his wife, and his artist. Lover. It's exactly the kind of scandal Cassandra thrives on." "She planned this," Elizabeth whispered. "Somehow she orchestrated all of it." "I know." Dominic leaned closer to the glass. And I'm going to prove it. I have investigators digging into her past, her connections, everything, whatever it takes. Elizabeth pressed her palm against the partition. On the other side, Dominic matched the gesture, their hands separated by mere centimeters of plexiglass, yet divided by an unbridgeable gulf of circumstance. The things she told me, Elizabeth said, her voice dropping, about my mother and your father. I'm looking into that too, he interrupted. If there's any connection, I'll find it. A guard cleared his throat, signaling their time was waning. I can't bear this, Elizabeth confessed, tears threatening. Not the cell, not the charges. Being separated from you, that's the true punishment. Dominic's eyes darkened with an emotion so raw it took her breath away. Every night, he said, his voice dropping to an intimate murmur, I lie awake remembering the feel of your skin against mine, the sound of your breath catching when I touch you just right, the way your body melts into mine, as if we were created to fit together. Heat bloomed across Elizabeth's cheeks, spreading down her neck to pool low in her belly. Even here, even now, he could ignite her with mere words. Do you remember our last night together? He continued, his gaze holding hers captive. How the moonlight painted your body in silver as you moved above me. How your lips parted on my name when you... Time's up, the guard announced, approaching. Elizabeth sighed. Dominic straightened, his expression shifting seamlessly from intimate to businesslike. Wells will visit you tomorrow to prepare your defense. Don't lose hope, Elizabeth. I will get you out of here, whatever it takes. As she was led back to her cell, Elizabeth replayed his words, clinging to them like a lifeline in the sea of uncertainty that had become her existence. That night brought fresh horrors. A new inmate moved into the cell across from hers, a muscular woman with a jagged scar bisecting one eyebrow. Throughout the evening, Elizabeth caught the woman watching her with predatory calculation. Each time their eyes met, the woman dragged, her finger across her throat in unmistakable threat. Sleep became impossible. Elizabeth lay rigid on her bunk, every sense heightened, waiting for an attack she knew would come. When footsteps approached her cell well past midnight, her heart nearly stopped. A folded piece of paper slid under her door. With trembling fingers, Elizabeth retrieved it, unfolding the note to find an elegant, familiar script. The first wife wasn't the first victim. Westlake Sanitarium, 1985-1989. Patient number 4673, Cassandra Mercer. Diagnosed psychopathic tendencies, pathological lying, poisoning of family pets, and younger sibling. Elizabeth stared at the note, her heart racing. The same handwriting as the anonymous texts. Cassandra had been institutionalized under a different name. But who could have access to such information, and why share it now? The night stretched endlessly, each minute an eternity of vigilance. When dawn finally broke, Elizabeth had not slept at all, her mind racing with questions, while her body remained coiled tight with fear of attack. The threatening inmate had disappeared, transferred to another unit without explanation. The following morning brought Harrison Wells, a silver-haired man with piercing blue eyes and the commanding presence of someone accustomed to being the most powerful person in any room. Miss Lyle, he greeted her in the attorney conference room. I've reviewed your case. The prosecution's evidence is compelling but circumstantial. We have work to do. Elizabeth's exhaustion-blurred vision made Wells appear to swim before her. She gripped the table edge to steady herself. They're going to kill me in here, she whispered. Wells paused in arranging his documents, studying her with shrewd assessment. Explain. She told him about Ruby's warning, the threatening inmate, the inexplicable transfer. Cassandra has connections everywhere, even in here. I'll arrange for protective isolation, Wells said immediately, making a note. Now let's return to your case. For an hour, he meticulously dissected her relationship with Dominic, her interactions with Cassandra, the events leading to the poisoning. He recorded every detail with clinical detachment, showing no judgment about her affair with a married man. "There's something else," Elizabeth said when they had finished the timeline. She produced the note from beneath her prison-issued shirt. "This came last night. Wells studied it, his expression revealing nothing. Interesting. I'll have my team investigate immediately." He slipped the note into his briefcase. "In the meantime, prepare yourself. Cassandra Higgins has extensive social connections. The media narrative is already casting you as the obsessed other woman who attempted to eliminate her rival." "It's not true," Elizabeth protested. "Truth is secondary in cases like this," Wells replied pragmatically. "Perception is paramount, and currently the perception is not in your favor." After Wells departed, Elizabeth was assigned protective isolation, a mixed blessing that kept her safe from potential attackers, but trapped her in her cell for 23 hours a day. Alone with her thoughts, the walls seemed to inch closer with each passing hour, her mind replaying every moment with Dominic, every interaction with Cassandra, searching for clues she might have missed. At night, the prison's sounds transformed, amplified by darkness, distant screams, whispered threats, the soft padding of guards' footsteps. Elizabeth began scratching tally marks into the wall beside her bunk, like a castaway on a deserted island. 7 days. 8. 9. On the 10th day, a different guard appeared at her cell door during meal delivery. "Got kitchen duty," he announced, unlocking her door. "I'm in protective isolation," Elizabeth reminded him, wary. The guard shrugged. "Orders changed. Move." Too tired to argue and desperate for human contact after days of solitude, Elizabeth followed. The kitchen's steam and clatter were almost overwhelming after the sterile quiet of isolation. She was assigned to vegetable preparation, a knife placed in her hands with casual disregard for her supposed violent tendencies. "You're her, aren't you?" a voice murmured beside her. "The artist who poisoned Cassandra Higgins." Elizabeth turned to find a middle-aged woman with faded blonde hair watching her with uncertain eyes. "I didn't poison anyone," Elizabeth replied automatically. The woman gave a thin smile. "No one ever does in here." She continued chopping for a moment before adding, "I knew her, you know, before she was Cassandra Higgins, back when she was Cassandra Mercer." Elizabeth's knife stilled mid-cut. "What did you say?" "Worked as her personal assistant for 6 months in 2015. Before that, she was married to energy magnate Edward Blackwell under the name Sandra Mercer." The woman's voice dropped further. "His first wife died mysteriously. Food poisoning, they said. But there were rumors." "Why?" "Are you telling me this?" Elizabeth asked. "Because I recognize a setup when I see one." The woman's eyes held a haunted quality. "I'm here because financial records were falsified under my authorization while I worked for her. Records I never touched. Sound familiar?" A cold sensation crept along Elizabeth's spine. "What happened to Edward Blackwell?" "Heart attack. 2 months after she secured her divorce settlement." The woman slid a small piece of paper across the cutting board. "If you get out of here alive, contact this man. He was Blackwell's head of security. He knows things about Cassandra that never made it into the official reports." Before Elizabeth could respond, guards announced the end of kitchen duty. As they were led back to their cells, Elizabeth palmed the paper, concealing it in her waistband. Back in isolation, she examined the name and number scrawled in faded blue ink. Alexander. Harrison. That night, Elizabeth dreamed of Dominic. In her dream, they walked through the garden cottage, but the doors all led to prison cells, and Cassandra's laughter echoed from every shadow. She woke gasping, sheets twisted around her limbs like restraints, the concrete walls seeming to pulse. In the darkness, for the first time since her arrest, fear for Dominic overshadowed fear for herself. If Cassandra had systematically destroyed those who crossed her, if she had potentially murdered a previous husband, what might she do to Dominic if he continued investigating her past? Elizabeth pressed her forehead against the cool concrete wall, tears tracking silently down her cheeks. She had never felt so utterly alone, so completely helpless. Her freedom, her future, her very life rested in the hands of others. Dominic, Wells, mysterious allies sending notes and warnings. In the privacy of her cell, Elizabeth allowed her hand to drift down her body, recalling Dominic's touch, his taste, the weight of him above her. The memories were both comfort and torment, a reminder of what she stood to lose if they couldn't unravel Cassandra's web of deceit. "I will survive this," she whispered to the darkness, a vow to herself and to the man who had risked everything for her. "I will find the truth, whatever it takes." As she finally drifted toward restless sleep, Elizabeth dreamed of Dominic's voice, whispering promises against her skin. But in the shadowy landscape of her dreams, Cassandra watched from darkened corners, her smile blood-red and triumphant as she raised a teacup in mocking toast. Miles away, in the stillness of his penthouse, Dominic Higgins studied an old photograph, excavated from his father's private files. A younger version of Richard Higgins stood with his arm around a beautiful dark-skinned woman with Elizabeth's eyes. Scrawled on the back in his father's handwriting, Christine Lyle, 1994. Problem solved. The implications chilled him to the bone. How deep did this conspiracy run? And was he unwittingly continuing a deadly family legacy? Chapter 8. Deadly Revelations. Polished corridors of Westlake Medical Center carried the hushed reverence of expensive healthcare. Dominic adjusted his tie as he approached the office of Dr. Malcolm Reynolds, Cassandra's obstetrician for the supposed pregnancy. After a week of investigations, substantial donations, and carefully implied threats, he had finally secured this meeting. "Mr. Higgins," Dr. Reynolds greeted him, rising from behind an imposing mahogany desk. "I understand you have concerns about your wife's medical records." "Not concerns, Doctor. Certainties." Dominic placed a folder on the desk. "These are copies of files from Westbrook Fertility Clinic indicating my wife has been undergoing hormonal treatments to simulate pregnancy symptoms. What I need to know is your involvement." The doctor's face paled as he scanned the documents. "Mr. Higgins, doctor-patient confidentiality prevents me from—" "Let me be clear," Dominic interrupted, his voice deadly calm. "A woman is in prison for attempting to murder my wife. If you contributed to this frame-up, knowingly or unknowingly, you are complicit in that injustice." Reynolds sank back into his chair, suddenly looking older than his 60 years. "She said, 'It was to save your marriage,'" he admitted, shoulders slumping, "that she had suffered multiple miscarriages and couldn't bear to disappoint you again. And you believed her. She had documentation of previous pregnancies and losses." Reynolds opened a drawer, extracting a file. These medical records from her previous doctors seemed legitimate, and she was persuasive. "Persuasive how?" Dominic pressed. The doctor's eyes flickered to a photograph on his desk. 2 teenage boys in graduation gowns. "My sons attend Westridge Academy. Their scholarships were arranged by Mrs. Higgins. She implied that her patronage was conditional." "Blackmail," Dominic translated flatly. Reynolds nodded miserably. "I prescribed hormonal supplements that would create pregnancy symptoms, mild nausea, breast tenderness, mood changes. I falsified ultrasound reports." He met Dominic's gaze directly. "I've jeopardized my entire career, Mr. Higgins, and I will likely lose my license for this. But I need you to know I had nothing to do with any poisoning plot." "I believe you," Dominic said after a moment, "but I'll need your sworn testimony to that effect." "You'll have it," Reynolds promised. "And there's something else you should and know." He hesitated, then continued. "Last week, Mrs. Higgins requested a very unusual prescription, a rare botanical compound for what she claimed was a dermatological condition. When I researched it, I discovered it contains derivatives of aconite." Dominic's blood ran cold. "The poison found in her system." "Yes, I refused to prescribe it." Reynolds's voice dropped. "The next day I received this." He slid his phone across the desk, displaying a text message. "Your boys look so vulnerable crossing Hammond Street after dark. It would be a shame if something happened to them." "How long has she been your patient?" Dominic asked, photographing the message with his own phone. 3 years. Reynolds hesitated. "But I knew her before that, when she went by a different name. Sandra Blackwell, then wife of Edward Blackwell. The energy magnate who died of a heart attack?" Reynolds nodded. "I was his physician as well. His death, I had questions that were never fully resolved. As Dominic left the medical center, he phoned Harrison Wells. We have the doctor's testimony about the fake pregnancy and the aconite connection, but we need more." "My team found something at the hospital," Wells replied. "Security footage from the day of the poisoning. Meet me at my office in an hour." The security video played on Wells' massive monitor, showing Cassandra's private hospital room from an angle that captured the doorway and most of the bed. The timestamp indicated it was from the morning of the poisoning, 3 hours before Dominic and Elizabeth arrived. "Watch the tea service," Wells instructed, pointing to the corner of the screen where a hospital aide placed a tray on the bedside table. After the aide left, Cassandra rose from her bed with none of the weakness she later displayed. She moved to her designer handbag, withdrawing a small vial. With practiced precision, she added several drops to one of the teacups, then returned to bed, arranging herself in a posture of elegant suffering. "She poisoned her own tea," Dominic breathed, watching as Cassandra carefully positioned the doctored cup on the side of the tray where Elizabeth would later sit. "There's more," Wells said grimly, advancing the footage. Cassandra reached again, into her handbag, extracting an identical vial. She studied it momentarily, then slipped out of the room, disappearing from camera view. The timestamp showed she was gone for precisely 7 minutes. "Where did she go?" Dominic demanded. "Hospital. Though cameras show her entering the women's restroom on that floor," Wells explained. "The same restroom Elizabeth used upon arriving at the hospital. We believe that's when she planted the vial in Elizabeth's purse." Dominic ran a hand through his hair, rage and relief warring within him. "This proves Elizabeth's innocence." "It's strong evidence," Wells agreed. "But Cassandra's lawyers will argue the footage is inconclusive. We need more to ensure Elizabeth's freedom. What about the connection to Edward Blackwell? The doctor mentioned—" "My investigators are pursuing that angle," Wells interrupted. "The financial records from Blackwell's companies show significant irregularities after his death. Funds transferred to offshore accounts, shell corporations dissolving. Classic signs of sophisticated embezzlement." A knock at the office door preceded Wells's assistant, who entered with a thick folder. "The information you requested about Westlake." "Sanitarium, sir." Wells thanked her, then spread the documents across his desk. Patient records from 1985 to 1989, heavily redacted, but our source at the facility confirmed Cassandra Mercer was committed at age 16 after poisoning her family's dogs and later her younger brother. Dominic studied the psychiatric evaluations, the clinical language failing to disguise the disturbing patterns they described. Did her brother survive? Yes, but with permanent kidney damage. Wells extracted a news clipping. The family covered up the incident. Substantial donations to the hospital where the boy was treated ensured discretion, Cassandra was quietly institutionalized as an emotional disturbance rather than facing juvenile detention. And after her release, she reinvented herself. Plastic surgery, new identity documents, cultivated connections to wealthy circles. Wells tapped another file. She's been Cassandra Mercer, Sandra Blackwell, and now Cassandra Higgins, always targeting wealthy, powerful men, always leaving destruction in her wake. How did she get past the background checks before our marriage? Dominic wondered. Her family's influence, most likely. The Mercers lost their fortune in the 2008 financial crisis, but their connections remained intact. Wells' expression grew grave. There's one more connection you need to see. He produced a final photograph, a younger Cassandra standing beside Dominic's father, Richard Higgins, at some society function. Their body language suggested intimate familiarity, dated 1995, Wells noted. 1 year after your father's alleged involvement with Christine Lyle. Dominic stared at the image, understanding dawning like a cold sunrise. She knew my father before she targeted me. This wasn't random. His voice hardened. And Elizabeth's mother wasn't random either. This has been an elaborate game spanning decades. The courtroom hummed with tension as Elizabeth sat beside Harrison Wells at the defense table. 2 weeks had passed since her arrest. 2 weeks of headlines painting her as a femme fatale, a homewrecker turned attempted murderer. The preliminary hearing would determine if the case proceeded to trial. Across the aisle, Cassandra made her entrance in a wheelchair pushed by a stern-faced nurse. Her appearance had been carefully crafted. Designer outfit in subdued colors, minimal makeup suggesting dignity and suffering, a cashmere wrap around shoulders that appeared frailer than Elizabeth remembered. Their eyes met briefly across the courtroom. Where Elizabeth expected to find hatred or triumph in Cassandra's gaze, she found only cold calculation, as if the entire proceeding were merely a move in some complex game Elizabeth didn't fully understand. Dominic entered moments later, taking a seat directly behind Elizabeth. Though he couldn't touch her, his presence radiated support like physical warmth against her back. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Judge Eleanor Harmon entered. The proceedings moved with bureaucratic efficiency. Through opening statements, the prosecution painted Elizabeth as an obsessed artist who'd seduced Dominic Higgins and attempted to eliminate her rival through poison. They emphasized the vial found in her purse, her unlimited access to Cassandra's hospital room, her artistic knowledge of botanical toxins. When Harrison Wells rose for the defense, his commanding presence transformed the courtroom atmosphere. "Your Honor, we move to dismiss all charges against Elizabeth Lyle on grounds of false arrest and manufactured evidence." He approached the bench, presenting a folder of documents. "We have proof that Cassandra Higgins orchestrated this entire scenario, including poisoning herself and planting evidence to frame Miss Lyle." The prosecutor objected vehemently, but Judge Harmon reviewed the materials with narrowed eyes. "These are serious allegations, Mr. Wells. What evidence supports them?" Hospital security footage showing Mrs. Higgins tainting her own tea and leaving her room during the exact time frame when the poison vial was planted in Miss Lyle's purse. Wells produced a flash drive. Additionally, medical records proving Mrs. Higgins fabricated her pregnancy to manipulate my client and her husband. From her wheelchair, Cassandra's perfect composure slipped for the first time, her eyes widening fractionally. "Furthermore," Wells continued, "we have documented evidence of Mrs. Higgins's history of similar manipulations under previous identities, including her institutionalization as a teenager for poisoning incidents." Murmurs swept the courtroom as Wells methodically dismantled the prosecution's case. When Dr. Reynolds was called to testify about the fake pregnancy and blackmail, Cassandra's attorney requested a recess to consult with his client. During the break, Elizabeth turned to face Dominic for the first time. "How did you find all this?" she whispered. "I would have torn the world apart to free you," he replied, his voice low and fierce. His hand briefly covered hers on the rail separating them, the touch electric even in its brevity. "But there's more, Elizabeth. About your mother. About my father. Connections I'm still unraveling." Before he could elaborate, the doors burst open as Cassandra returned, her attorney looking grim beside her. Judge Harmon called the court back to order. "Your Honor," Cassandra's attorney began, "in light of new evidence, Mrs. Higgins wishes to withdraw her accusations against Miss Lyle." A charge ran through the courtroom. The prosecutor looked blindsided, conferring hurriedly with his team. "Mrs. Higgins has been under extreme emotional distress," her attorney continued smoothly. "She now recognizes that she may have misinterpreted events due to her fragile condition. Is the prosecution prepared to proceed without the victim's cooperation?" Judge Harmon asked pointedly. After further consultation, the prosecutor stood. "The state moves to dismiss charges against Elizabeth Lyle, Your Honor, pending further investigation." "So ordered," Judge Harmon declared, bringing down her gavel with finality. "Miss Lyle, you are free to go." The words seemed to hang in the air, too wonderful to be real. Elizabeth sat frozen until Wells gently touched her arm. "It's over," he said quietly, "for now." As she stood on shaky legs, her gaze sought Cassandra, who was already being wheeled toward a side exit. Their eyes locked one final time. Against all logic, Cassandra smiled, a small, knowing curve of her lips that sent a chill through Elizabeth's body. It wasn't over. Whatever game Cassandra was playing had merely entered a new phase. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed like predators scenting blood. Wells expertly shepherded Elizabeth through the chaos toward a waiting car. Dominic followed close behind, his hand at the small of her back, a gesture of protection and possession that the photographers eagerly captured. In the privacy of the car, Elizabeth finally allowed herself to collapse against Dominic's chest, her composure crumbling as weeks of fear and isolation poured out in racking sobs. His arms enfolded her, strong and secure, his lips pressing against her hair as he murmured soothing words. "It's all right now," he whispered. "You're safe. You're free." But as the car pulled away from the courthouse, Elizabeth couldn't shake the memory of Cassandra's smile. A predator's smile, patient and certain, and she wondered if anyone connected to the Higgins family could ever truly be safe or free. Chapter 9. The Shocking Truth. Dominic's penthouse overlooked the glittering city skyline, the floor-to-ceiling windows creating the illusion of floating above the world. Elizabeth stood at the glass, watching raindrops trace silver paths downward, each drop catching fragments of light from the city below. After 3 weeks of freedom, she still sometimes woke in the night, heart pounding, convinced she was back in that cell. "Here," Dominic said softly, offering a glass of Cabernet as he joined her at the window. His presence behind her was warm, solid, reassuring. "You seemed lost in thought." "I was thinking about Cassandra." Elizabeth took the wine, her fingers brushing his. Even that slight contact sent electricity through her body. "She's been too quiet since the hearing." After the charges had been dismissed, Cassandra had retreated to the Higgins summer estate in the Hamptons. The press had eventually tired of camping outside Dominic's building, seeking glimpses of the scandalous couple. The story had begun its inevitable slide from front-page news to forgotten footnote. "My security team monitors her movements," Dominic assured her, his free hand settling at the small of her back. "She hasn't left the Hamptons property in weeks." "That doesn't comfort me," Elizabeth murmured. "She's planning something. I can feel it." Dominic set down his wine and turned her to face him, his hands cupping her face with gentle intensity. "Nothing will happen to you. I won't allow it." She leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his certainty. After weeks apart, their reunion had been explosive, desperate, clinging lovemaking that left her sheets tangled and both their bodies marked with the evidence of unleashed passion. Yet beneath the physical reconnection, questions lingered like, "Shadows, we need to talk about what you found," she said reluctantly, "about my mother and your father." Dominic's expression darkened. He moved to a sleek desk in the corner, retrieving a leather portfolio. "I've hesitated to show you this," he admitted as they settled onto the sofa. "The implications are disturbing." Inside the portfolio lay documents, photographs, and handwritten notes organized with meticulous care. The first photo showed Elizabeth's mother, younger than she remembered but unmistakable, standing beside Richard Higgins at what appeared to be a corporate event. They met when she was hired as his executive assistant in 1992, Dominic explained. According to these personnel records, she had exceptional qualifications, fluent in 4 languages, degrees in international relations and business. "That doesn't sound like my mother," Elizabeth said, confused. "She was an artist. She taught me to draw when I was barely old enough to hold a pencil." Dominic extracted another document, a security clearance application with her mother's photograph, but a different name, Christina Laurent. "I believe your mother was living under an assumed identity when she worked for my father." Elizabeth's hand trembled as she touched the unfamiliar name beneath her mother's familiar face. "Why would she do that?" "That's where things get complicated," Dominic hesitated. "Have you ever heard of Project Chimera?" Elizabeth shook her head. It was a classified government initiative in the late 1980s focused on corporate espionage. My father's company had defense contracts worth billions. According to these files, Christina Laurent, your mother, was placed at Higgins International to monitor certain technology transfers that were raising national security concerns. The room seemed to tilt beneath Elizabeth. "My mother was a spy, an intelligence operative," Dominic corrected gently. "But something went wrong. She went off-grid, abandoned her mission." "The next record we have is her marriage certificate to your father, James Lyle, in 1991. She appears to have built a new life, a real one." "Until she disappeared when I was 5, Elizabeth whispered. Dominic nodded grimly. "That's where Cassandra enters the picture." He produced an old photograph showing a much younger Cassandra, her features recognizable despite obvious surgical refinements, standing beside Richard Higgins at a charity gala. "My father met Cassandra, then using the name Sandra Mercer, shortly. After your mother disappeared, their relationship was brief but significant." "How so?" "Cassandra had connections to certain private intelligence firms. The kind that operate in moral gray areas." Dominic's jaw tightened. "I believe my father hired her to locate your mother, who possessed damaging information about his business practices." Elizabeth stood abruptly, needing distance from the horrifying implications. "Are you saying your father had my mother killed?" "I don't know," Dominic admitted, his voice strained. "But I found this in his private safe." He handed her a single sheet of paper, a bank transfer for $1 million to a numbered account, dated 1 week after her mother's disappearance. The memo line contained just 2 words: "Problem resolved." Tears blurred Elizabeth's vision as decades of uncertainty crystallized into devastating possibility. "All these years, I imagined she abandoned me, that she didn't want me." Dominic crossed to her, gathering her into his arms. "She loved you," he whispered fiercely against her hair. "Every report indicates she was devoted to you. Whatever happened, she didn't leave by choice." Elizabeth clung to him, her tears soaking his shirt. When she could speak again, her voice was hollow. "This connection between us, it's tainted by blood. Your father may have killed my mother, "The sins of our fathers are not ours," Dominic said, his grip tightening. "What we have is our own, pure, real." "Is it?" Elizabeth pulled back to study his face. "How can you look at me and not see your father's crime? How can you look at me and not see your mother's loss?" he countered. "Yet here we are." Their eyes held, acknowledging the dangerous inheritance they both carried. Then, as if by mutual understanding, their lips met in a kiss that spoke of defiance against the past, a claiming of their own destiny. His hands tangled in her hair as she pressed herself against him, seeking the solid reality of his body to anchor her against the storm of revelations. They made love there on the living room floor, with desperate intensity, as if they could erase the shadows of the past with each touch, each kiss, each shuddering moment of connection. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, Elizabeth's head on his chest, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat gradually restored her sense of the present. "There's one more piece to this puzzle," Dominic said eventually, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her bare shoulder. "Someone has been feeding us information about Cassandra, the fertility clinic login, the sanitarium records, the details about her previous identities." "Someone who wants to destroy her," Elizabeth suggested, "or someone who wants to protect us." Dominic reached for the portfolio again, extracting a final document. This arrived yesterday. Security footage from the Westlake Sanitarium, 1989, the day Cassandra was released. Elizabeth sat up, pulling Dominic's discarded shirt around her as she examined the grainy image. It showed a teenage Cassandra being escorted from the facility by an older couple, presumably her parents, and a young man in his 20s. "Look at the young man," Dominic directed, his voice tight. Elizabeth studied the fuzzy figure, then gasped. "He looks like you." "Not like me," Dominic corrected grimly. "Like my brother. My half-brother, to be precise. Alexander Higgins, my father's son from his first marriage." "You have a brother?" Elizabeth asked, stunned. "You've never mentioned him." "Because he officially doesn't exist anymore. After a falling out with my father, he changed his name and disappeared from public life 20 years ago." Dominic's expression was troubled. "According to these records, Alexander was involved with Cassandra when they were teenagers. He was the one who reported her to authorities after she poisoned her brother." Elizabeth's mind raced, connecting pieces of the elaborate puzzle. "You think he's the one who's been helping us? Warning us about Cassandra?" "It makes sense. He would know her better than anyone, would recognize the patterns of her behavior." Dominic stood, pacing the room with restless energy. "But why now? Why not warn me before I married her?" Before Elizabeth could respond, Dominic's phone rang. He answered, his expression shifting from annoyance to alarm. "When?" he demanded. "Are you certain?" After listening for another moment, he ended the call, turning to Elizabeth with grim urgency. "That was my security team. Cassandra left the Hamptons property 6 hours ago. Her current whereabouts are unknown." A chill swept through Elizabeth. "She's coming for us. Pack a bag," Dominic instructed, already moving toward the bedroom. "We're leaving now." Elizabeth dressed quickly, mind racing. "Where will we go?" "Somewhere she won't expect." Dominic returned with a small duffel bag, his expression resolute. "My brother's place." The cabin perched on the edge of a wooded lake, its rustic exterior belying the sophisticated security system that had tracked their approach from miles away. As Dominic parked their rental car beneath a stand of ancient pines, the cabin door opened. Alexander Higgins, now known as Alex Harrison, stood silhouetted against the warm light behind him. Taller than Dominic, with the same chiseled features softened by a short beard, he regarded them with wary assessment. "You took your time figuring it out," he said by way of greeting, his voice a deeper version of Dominic's. "You could have been more direct," Dominic replied, tension evident in his stance. Alex's gaze shifted to Elizabeth, his expression softening. "You look like her. Your mother." Elizabeth stiffened. "You knew my mother." "I tried to help her," Alex said quietly. Too late, as it turned out. Before he could elaborate, Alex's attention snapped to something over their shoulders. His expression hardened as he reached beneath his jacket. "Inside," he commanded. Now, they turned to see headlights approaching along the narrow access road, moving too fast for the treacherous curves. "Cassandra," Dominic breathed, pushing Elizabeth toward the cabin door. "Not alone," Alex added grimly, drawing a pistol from his shoulder holster. "Move!" As they rushed inside, the approaching vehicle skidded to a halt in a spray of gravel. The cabin door slammed behind them as Alex engaged multiple locks. Through the window, Elizabeth caught a glimpse of Cassandra emerging from a black SUV, her face a mask of cold determination in the moonlight. She wasn't alone. A man in a dark suit accompanied her, his military bearing unmistakable even at a distance. Something metallic gleamed in his hand. "She brought her favorite problem solver," Alex said, positioning himself away from the windows. "Viktor Orlov, former Spetsnaz, current mercenary." "Why is she doing this?" Elizabeth asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The charges were dropped. She got away with everything." "Because you know too much," Alex replied, checking his weapon with practiced efficiency. "Both of you!" Dominic pulled Elizabeth close, his body a shield between her and the door. "What do we know that's worth killing for?" "The truth about your father," Alex said grimly. "About what really happened 27 years ago. About why our father arranged your marriage to Cassandra in the first place." Outside, footsteps crunched on gravel, approaching the cabin with deliberate slowness. "What are you talking about?" Dominic demanded. "There's no time to explain," Alex said, moving toward a bookcase that concealed a hidden passage. "This tunnel leads to a boathouse. Take the motorboat across the lake. There's a car waiting with documents, money, everything you'll need." "We're not leaving you to face them alone," Elizabeth protested. Alex's smile was sad and knowing. "This was always how it would end. I've been preparing for this confrontation for decades." A heavy knock rattled the cabin door. Cassandra's voice drifted through, eerily calm. "Dominic, darling, I know you're in there. It's time we had a family reunion." Alex pushed them toward the hidden passage. "Go, I'll hold them off." Dominic hesitated, torn between escaping with Elizabeth and confronting the woman who had caused so much destruction. "She'll never stop," Elizabeth realized suddenly. "As long as she's free, we'll never be safe." The door shuddered under a powerful impact. Wood splintered around the lock. "Go!" Alex ordered again, more urgently. "The answers you seek are in a file on the boat, about your mother Elizabeth, about why all of this happened." Another blow, and the door frame began to crack. Dominic made his decision, pulling Elizabeth toward the secret passage. "We'll get help," he promised his brother. "We'll come back for you." Alex's smile was grim. "Don't make promises you can't keep." As the bookcase slid closed behind them, Elizabeth heard the cabin door finally give way, with a crash of splintering wood. Their desperate flight through the dark tunnel was accompanied by the muffled sound of shouting, followed by the unmistakable crack of gunfire. Behind them, the truth they had sought for so long awaited its terrible revelation. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the slim hope of escape. Between them, their clasped hands promised the only certainty either could claim, that whatever awaited them, they would face it together. Chapter 10. Passion's Triumph. The motorboat cut through black water, its engine growling against the night. Elizabeth clung to the side, her hair whipping in the wind as Dominic navigated around the lake's perimeter, keeping to the shadows cast by overhanging trees. Behind them, the distant cabin glowed with erratic flashes of light, followed seconds later by the muffled sounds of gunfire. "We have to go back!" she shouted over the engine's roar. "We can't leave him there!" Dominic's expression was a mask of grim determination. "We can't help him if we're dead," he called back. Alex made his choice. The boathouse appeared ahead, a weathered structure jutting into the water. Dominic cut the engine, allowing momentum to carry them into the sheltered dock. As promised, a waterproof case awaited them, containing passports, cash, and a sealed manila envelope labeled with Elizabeth's name. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal. Inside lay a handwritten letter and a flash drive, along with a faded photograph of her mother holding a baby, her, while standing beside a younger Alex Higgins. "What is this?" she whispered, turning to Dominic. Before he could answer, the night erupted with a thunderous explosion. They turned to see the cabin, engulfed in flames, a fireball rising into the darkness. The shockwave rippled across the water, rocking the boat violently. "Alex," Dominic breathed, his face ashen in the reflected firelight. Elizabeth clutched the letter, grief for a man she'd barely met, warring with terror at their narrow escape. "We need to go," she urged gently. "We can't let his sacrifice be for nothing." They found the promised car, a nondescript sedan with tinted windows, hidden beneath camouflage netting behind the boathouse. As Dominic drove them away from the burning cabin, Elizabeth read Alex's letter by the dim glow of her phone. "Elizabeth, if you're reading this, I've likely paid the debt I've carried for 27 years. The truth I've protected at great cost is now yours to carry. Your mother was not an intelligence operative, as the documents suggest. That cover story was created by my father to justify her presence in his life. The truth is simpler and more tragic. They fell in love, deeply consuming love that defied the social boundaries of their worlds." Richard Higgins was already a married man when he met Christine Lyle, your mother, at an art gallery where she worked. Their affair continued for years, during which you were conceived and born. The birth certificate naming James Lyle as your father was falsified. Richard Higgins was your biological father, which makes Dominic your half-brother. Elizabeth's hand flew to her mouth, shock and revulsion coursing through her. "Stop the car," she gasped. Dominic pulled over immediately. "What is it?" he asked, alarmed by her pallor. Unable to speak, she thrust the letter into his hands. As he read, his expression transformed from concern to disbelief to horror. "This can't be true," he whispered, looking up to meet her eyes. Elizabeth felt physically ill. The man she loved, the man whose body she knew as intimately as her own, was her brother. Their passion, their connection, everything tainted by an unthinkable taboo. "Keep reading," she managed, her voice barely audible. Dominic returned to the letter, his hands visibly shaking. "The DNA test on the flash drive proves what I've long suspected. Richard Higgins could not have been your biological father, despite his belief. Your mother was already pregnant when they met, though she never revealed this to him. Whether to protect her child or for reasons of her own, she allowed Richard to believe you were his daughter. When Richard discovered your mother, planned to leave him and take you, whom he believed was his child, he became dangerous. I warned your mother, helped her disappear with you. For 5 years, you lived in safety under new identities. Then Cassandra entered our lives. Cassandra Mercer was my mistake, my first love, a troubled soul I couldn't save. After her release from Westlake Sanitarium, she became obsessed with the Higgins fortune. When she discovered my connection to your mother's disappearance, she blackmailed me, threatening to reveal your location to my father. Instead, she betrayed us all. She sold your mother's location to Richard, then manipulated him into hiring the man who would ultimately silence Christine forever. The problem-resolved payment was Cassandra's commission for orchestrating the murder while keeping Richard's hands clean. Years later, when Richard arranged Dominic's marriage to Cassandra, now reinvented with surgical precision and a new history, I recognized her immediately. But I couldn't intervene without exposing the truth about your mother, about you, about my own complicity in a decades-long deception. The evidence against Cassandra is on the flash drive. Recordings, financial transactions, everything needed to bring her to justice. Take it to Harrison Wells. He knows what to do. Elizabeth, you and Dominic share no blood. You are free to love each other without the shadow of the past. The passion between you is pure, perhaps the only pure thing to emerge from this twisted history. Forgive me for waiting so long to right these wrongs. Some debts can only be paid in full. Alexander. Dominic lowered the letter, his eyes meeting Elizabeth's in the shadowed car. We're not siblings, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But your father believed I was his daughter, Elizabeth whispered. He had my mother killed to keep that secret. And Cassandra orchestrated all of it, Dominic added, rage darkening his features. She manipulated my father, married me as part of some long-game revenge against the Higgins family. The poisoning, the frame-up, it was never about me, Elizabeth realized. I was just a convenient tool. She wanted to destroy you, your family, legacy, everything. Dominic reached for her, pulling her across the console into his arms. The relief of knowing they shared no blood, that their love wasn't tainted by an unspeakable taboo, broke through the horror of the other revelations. Their lips met in a desperate kiss, reaffirming the connection that had drawn them together from the first moment. We need to get somewhere safe, Dominic said when they finally separated. Cassandra survived once. She could have survived the explosion. The coastal safe house belonged to Harrison Wells, a modern structure of glass and concrete perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. For 3 days, they remained in seclusion, while Wells verified the evidence on Alex's flash drive and prepared legal proceedings. On the 4th morning, Elizabeth stood on the terrace, watching waves crash against the rocks below. The sun warmed her bare shoulders, its light catching the diamond on her left hand, Dominic's mother's ring, given to her the previous night after they'd made love with an intensity born of near loss and newfound freedom. The distant sound of an approaching helicopter shattered the momentary peace. Elizabeth tensed, scanning the horizon until she spotted it, a black speck growing larger against the blue sky. "Dominic!" she called urgently. He appeared at the doorway, instantly alert. At her tone, following her gaze to the helicopter, he pulled her inside. "We need to move, now." They had barely reached the stairs when the windows imploded in a shower of glass. The distinctive crack of gunfire echoed through the house as they ran to the garage. Dominic threw open the door of Wells' Porsche, shoving Elizabeth inside before racing to the driver's side. "How did she find us?" Elizabeth gasped as the car roared to life. "I don't know," Dominic replied grimly, accelerating out of the garage. "But I'm done running." The coastal road twisted along the cliffside, offering breathtaking views and deadly drops in equal measure. Dominic handled the car with practiced skill, but the helicopter maintained pursuit, hovering close enough that Elizabeth could see the sniper positioned in its open doorway. "There's a tunnel ahead," Dominic shouted over the engine's roar. "We'll lose them there and double back." They shot into the tunnel's darkness, just as bullets peppered the asphalt behind them. Dominic killed the headlights, navigating by memory and the distant glow of the exit. Halfway through, he executed a perfect handbrake turn, reversing direction and speeding back toward the entrance they'd come through. The helicopter waited at the far end, having anticipated their exit. It hovered uncertainly when they didn't appear, then began moving toward their actual position. As they burst from the tunnel, Dominic veered onto a maintenance road that wound up the mountainside. "Where are we going?" Elizabeth asked, clutching the dashboard as they bounced over the rough terrain. "To end this," Dominic replied, a dangerous edge to his voice. "On our terms." The road crested at a small plateau overlooking the ocean. Dominic parked the car and turned to Elizabeth. "No matter what happens next, know that I love you, that what we have is real, untainted by all this darkness." Before she could respond, he was out of the car, standing in the open as the helicopter approached. Elizabeth scrambled after him, heart pounding with terror. "What are you doing?" she screamed over the rotor's deafening beat. "Facing her," he replied, eyes locked on the hovering machine. "She wants me, not you. This ends now." The helicopter descended slowly, landing at the far edge of the plateau. The blades continued to rotate as a figure emerged, Cassandra Higgins, her face partially bandaged from the cabin explosion, her movement stiff but determined. Behind her came Victor Orloff, weapon raised and trained on Dominic. "How touching," Cassandra called, her voice carried on the wind. "The lovers make their last stand." "It's over, Cassandra," Dominic replied. "We have everything. The records of your institutionalization, your role in Christine Lyle's murder, the embezzlement from Blackwell Industries. Harrison Wells has already filed with the authorities." Something flickered across Cassandra's visible features. Doubt, perhaps, or calculation. "Authorities can be managed. Evidence can disappear. You should know that by now." "Not this time." Dominic took a step forward, hands raised to show he was unarmed. "Alex made copies, dozens of them, distributed to news organizations, federal agencies, international courts. There's nowhere left to run." Cassandra's laugh held an edge of hysteria. "Alex is dead. I watched him burn." "Are you certain?" a new voice called. All heads turned toward a figure emerging from the tree line. Alexander Harrison, bloodied and limping, but very much alive. In his hand he held a service pistol aimed steadily at Orloff. "Impossible," Cassandra breathed, genuine shock replacing her calculated composure. "You always did underestimate me," Alex said, moving closer. "Just like you underestimated what I'd do to protect my brother, to right the wrongs our family committed." Orloff swung his weapon toward Alex, creating a lethal standoff. "Drop it, Victor," Alex commanded. "It's finished. Federal agents are already on their way." As if to confirm his words, distant sirens became audible, winding up the coastal road. In that moment of distraction, Cassandra lunged forward, producing a small pistol from her jacket. She aimed not at Dominic or Alex, but at Elizabeth. "If I can't have him, neither will you," she snarled, finger tightening on the trigger. 3 shots rang out in rapid succession, Alex firing at Orloff, Orloff firing at Alex, and Dominic launching himself at Cassandra. Bodies collapsed in a chaotic tangle as Elizabeth stood frozen in horror. When the echoes faded, Orloff lay motionless, a bullet in his chest. Alex knelt, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. And Dominic struggled with Cassandra at the plateau's edge, her gun knocked aside, but her hands clawing at his face with feral intensity. "You were supposed to love me," she screamed, all pretense of sophistication stripped away. "Your father promised me. The Higgins fortune was mine. My father used you," Dominic grunted, trying to subdue her without causing further injury. "Just as you used him. Just as you tried to use me." With unexpected strength born of madness, Cassandra twisted free, scrambling toward her fallen weapon. Elizabeth reacted instinctively, diving for the gun and securing it before Cassandra could reach it. "It's over," Elizabeth said, rising too, her feet with the pistol held steadily in both hands. Cassandra froze, her face contorting with hatred. "You think you've won? You're nothing but another Lyle woman spreading her legs for Higgins' money." "My mother loved Richard Higgins," Elizabeth replied calmly, "and I love Dominic. Not his fortune, not his name. Him." "Love," Cassandra spat the word like poison. What do you know of love? I've lived my entire life without it, used, discarded, locked away and forgotten. Everything I've done, I did to survive. For a moment, Elizabeth glimpsed the damaged soul beneath the manipulative exterior, the abused child who had grown into a monster because no one had shown her another way. Pity flickered briefly, then hardened into resolution. Your choices brought you here, Elizabeth said, not your past. Sirens grew louder as vehicles approached the plateau. Cassandra glanced toward the cliff edge, then back at Elizabeth, calculation replacing desperation in her gaze. This isn't over, she promised softly. It will never be over. Before anyone could react, she turned and ran, not toward the helicopter as expected, but toward the cliff's edge. 3 steps, 4, then she was airborne, her body arcing gracefully against the blue sky before disappearing from view. Elizabeth lowered the gun, shaking uncontrollably as Dominic pulled her into his arms. Together they watched as federal agents swarmed the plateau, securing Orloff's body and the abandoned helicopter, calling for medical assistance for Alex. Do you think she survived? Elizabeth whispered, remembering how Cassandra had seemingly escaped death before. Dominic's arms tightened around her. No one could survive that fall. It's finally over. But even as he spoke, doubt lingered in his voice. 1 year later, the gallery hummed with conversation as New York's elite circulated among Elizabeth's paintings. Her first solo exhibition had drawn critics and collectors alike, but it was the centerpiece, a hauntingly beautiful portrait of a woman with Elizabeth's eyes, that commanded everyone's attention. Your mother would be proud, Dominic murmured, appearing at her side with 2 champagne flutes. Elizabeth accepted the crystal glass, her wedding band catching the light. I hope so, she said softly. I wanted to give her a voice after all these years of silence. Dominic's gaze traveled around the room, taking in the success his wife had achieved on her own merit. The Higgins fortune remained untouched in her work. Her talent alone had opened these doors. Have you decided about the foundation? He asked. Elizabeth nodded. The Christine Lyle Foundation for Missing Persons will launch next month. Alex's portion of the Higgins estate will fund it in perpetuity. The mention of his brother brought a smile to Dominic's face. After months of recovery, Alex had emerged from protective custody to testify against Orloff's surviving associates and the network of officials Cassandra had corrupted. Now he lived quietly on a ranch in Montana, healing from physical and emotional wounds accumulated over decades. He's coming for Thanksgiving, Dominic said. Says he's bringing someone special. Good, Elizabeth smiled. He deserves happiness after everything he sacrificed. As the evening wound down, they slipped away from the admiring crowd, leaving the gallery director to handle the final sales. In the back of their limousine, Elizabeth curled against Dominic's side, contentment washing over her. Take me home, she whispered against his ear, her hand sliding up his thigh with unmistakable intent. His eyes darkened with desire as he captured her wandering hand, bringing it to his lips. Always, he promised. Their penthouse, not the one Dominic had shared with Cassandra, but a new space they had chosen together, welcomed them with warm light and silence. They barely made it to the bedroom, shedding clothing with practiced urgency, lips and hands, reclaiming familiar territory with undiminished hunger. Their love-making had evolved over the months, sometimes tender, sometimes fierce, always a reaffirmation of the connection that had survived unimaginable obstacles. Tonight, it was slow and thorough, a celebration of their hard-won peace and the future stretching before them. Afterward, as Elizabeth drifted toward sleep in Dominic's arms, her head resting over his steadily beating heart, she reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From that first charged meeting in his study to the dark days of imprisonment, From devastating revelations to triumphant vindication, their love had been tested by fire and emerged stronger, purer. "What are you thinking?" Dominic asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Elizabeth smiled against his skin, that some passions are worth fighting for, worth dying for even. "Worth living for," he corrected gently, kissing her forehead. She was about to agree when the soft chime of her phone interrupted. With a reluctant sigh, she reached for it, then froze as she read the message from an unknown number. "You look beautiful in Valentino. Red was always your color." Elizabeth bolted upright, scanning the darkened bedroom as if expecting to find someone watching from the shadows. Her mind raced through the evening. She had indeed worn a Valentino gown, deep crimson against her dark skin. "What is it?" Dominic asked, instantly alert to her distress. Wordlessly, she handed him the phone. His expression hardened as he read the message, then immediately began checking their security system on his tablet. "All systems operational," he reported. "No breaches detected." "She's alive," Elizabeth whispered, the certainty settling like ice in her stomach. Somehow, she survived. Dominic pulled her close, his heartbeat strong and steady against her cheek. "If she is, we'll face her together. But I won't let her steal another moment of our happiness with fear." Elizabeth nodded, forcing herself to release the tension that had seized her body. He was right. Whether Cassandra had somehow cheated death again, or this was merely a final, cruel manipulation from beyond the grave, they couldn't allow her to control their lives any longer. Outside their window, the city glittered with countless lights, each representing lives and stories and secrets. Somewhere in that vast tapestry of humanity, perhaps Cassandra watched and waited, or perhaps she lay broken on distant rocks, her toxic legacy living on only in their fears. "I love you," Elizabeth whispered, reclaiming the moment, the night, their hard-won peace. "And I love you," Dominic answered, his arms tightening around her. "Nothing and no one will ever change that." As they drifted towards sleep, entwined in each other's arms, Elizabeth made a silent vow. Whatever the future held, whether peace or new challenges, she would face it without fear, confident in the passion that had survived every test. For in the end, that was their true triumph, not just surviving Cassandra's poison, but refusing to let it taint the pure, transformative love they had found in each other's arms.